Hello, hello, hello. Hey, hey, hey. I hope you're having a great day. I'm Hannah, aka the Paperback Bruncher, aka the host of the Moody Readers Book Club, where every single month we read a new mood read. So I know a lot of us, like myself, are mood readers, and we are looking to make bookish friends online. So that's what my book club is all about. Every single month, we pick kind of a mood, a theme, an energy to follow. So then that way we're really diversifying what we're reading, not only with the authors that we choose, but also with the genre. So we're kind of all over the place in the best way. This is kind of a new series for us here at the Moody Readers Book Club, where we are now trying to figure out how we take our book club a step further into a space where we actually can converse more with the authors that we choose each month, but also support them in a new way. So, this YouTube series is all about that, giving you guys a chance to connect with the authors and also to support them in a new way. So, for the month of May, we read the lovely book that is back here, as well as right here, The Last Days of the Midnight Ramblers by Sarah Tomlinson. And today we're going to be joined by Sarah. So I am going to give you a little intro about Sarah. I think it's really cool to be able to read these intros. I know sometimes they're a little cheesy or a little long, but these authors don't often get a chance to get to hear someone else talk about them. They're always having to talk about themselves and, introduce themselves. So this is a fun way for us to be able to be like, wow, look at all the accomplishments you've made so far. We're so proud of you and we're so excited to welcome you. So, book lovers, rock and roll aficionados, mood readers, today we are so excited to welcome the one and only Sarah Tomlinson. Sarah's not just any author, she's what I would call a literary rock star with over 15 years of experience as a journalist, a music critic, ghostwriter. Sarah has penned countless books, including some top secret New York Times bestsellers. We're going to get into that you might have devoured without even knowing that she was behind them. She hails from the cool coast of LA, where I often can be found trying to hang out with her. Sarah's turned her passion for music, literature, and pop culture into cutting edge cultural critiques and unforgettable stories. You've also probably seen her writing on the pages of places such as Marie Claire, Salon.com, Publishers Weekly, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, to name just a few. And now, of course, we are here to talk about her explosive debut novel, The Last Days of the Midnight Ramblers, which is what we would call a more of a gripping, glamorous, and mysterious journey into the world of rock and roll. So it's perfect for fans of Daisy Jones and The Six, the movie Almost Famous. Also, one of our old school book club picks that you might have been around for, The Groupies, is also very kind of similar time frame. So if you enjoyed one of those, I think that you would like this one too. It's definitely much more of a mystery than any of those and much more of a page turner. So let's get into the heart of rock and roll, get into some ghost writing. And everybody give a warm virtual welcome. Say hello in the comments. And hi, Sarah.
Hi, Hannah. Hi,
I always feel like
everyone.
I have to like mimic the crowd and be like, woo!
Whoop, whoop, whoop. I've got my coffee in one hand and I'm raising the roof with the other, as usual.
Perfect. Once we get started, it's just off camera. I have to grab it, but I have a little system in place. If you want to get into spoilers, I have like a little sign that says
Okay.
spoilers, and so that way we can hold it up, or we, we here over here too. But I can hold it up for any point that you're talking about the spoilers, so that if people want to mute, they can do that, and then when the sign goes away, they know to unmute. That's our like little system if you haven't finished the book yet. So just let me know if you want me to grab the sign.
That sounds great. I love it.
Just a cute little, fun little thing. Because I know a lot of times people get stressed. They're like, oh, I only, life got in the way. I only got halfway through the book before book club, or I just want to hear about ghostwriting, but I'm going to read the book when my library hold comes in, or things like that.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. Well, so this is a little bit different format, I guess you'd say, than your traditional author interview. I was trying to think of how to run this series, and so many authors get, interviewed for different publications or go on podcasts, and it's a lot of the same. It's like, tell us your bio, give us your elevator pitch. Here are these questions, which are great. They're interesting. I mean, they're good questions, but you've done it. So I'm like, how do we make it more interesting and also give a chance for the readers to get to know kind of the person behind the words? I think that life is all about human connection. if you kind of like, the person and who they are, you're more inclined to want to read their work or follow them or get to know them. So I kind of try to combo all of that into one little live stream. So
I love
we'll do
it.
a
And the only
combination.
thing I was going to correct you on in my introduction was that I think when you're in Los Angeles, I'm trying to hang out with you because you're so fun. That was my only correction. And I do think, I mean, I don't want to get us off track, but that is one of the best things about going to book conferences, about going to events. If you are a book lover, a reader, a writer, is just making that connection. And I do feel like you and I have become real friends. I'm so curious to know what you're reading, how your life is going. And so it all started with meeting at a book conference, which is beautiful.
It was so cool. I was like, not to make it about me, but I hadn't met Sarah before in real life. No, it was super cool because I actually this was my second year moderating for the Tucson Festival of Books. And this year they actually let me choose the panel. So I got to like choose all of you. And I was like, this is so much better. Like, not that it's not great to be able to discover new authors in a different way when you're almost forced to.
Right.
But that was so much more exciting for me because I knew I wanted to like read all of your books and meet all of you. And then of course I got to see you in LA and I was like, well, now it's just like a tradition. Now we're just going to have to keep this up and keep running.
I love it.
Super cool. All right, so let's start with a bit of like the rock and roll energy, if you will.
Yeah.
How did your background with being a music critic influence your writing for this book? Like, kind of, I guess, where was the idea born? Was it because of your journalism, or was that kind of like a bit of a bonus, or how did that come into play?
Well, it's interesting because, like many novelists, although this is my debut, I have 3 novels lovingly tucked in a drawer that have never seen the light of day. And the first novel I ever wrote was called Because the Night, which is an homage to a Patti Smith song. And the main characters were a female duo who were in a band together, who had a very passionate love affair, and he dies, and then she's trying to keep the band alive while also grieving him and finding out a secret about his past. And I love writing about music. When I was a music journalist, I loved being friends with musicians. I had a few relationships with musicians. I was so passionate about going to their shows, about listening to their albums, about interviewing them, about what made them tick, what inspired them. And so that was sort of all like percolating in the back of my creative brain. And then in 2016, I had been ghostwriting for about 8 years. And my agent, Kirby, who my book is dedicated to, he's like a great friend and advisor. He said, you should write a thriller about a ghostwriter. I find that readers and viewers of TV shows and movies love to learn about a world that they don't know anything about. And ghostwriting is such a closed world. It's meant to be secretive. It's meant to be something that people don't know about. And he's like, I think if you were to put a thriller in the world of a ghostwriter, it would just be so tantalizing for people. So I knew my character was going to be a ghostwriter. And then I had to think, well, what kind of memoir is she going to get hired to write? Because that's the most common ghostwriting job that I get, is to write a memoir with a celebrity and tell their sort of life story. And so it took me a minute. And then when I came up with the character of Anka, who is my ghostwriter Mari's client, who I'm sure we'll talk about in detail, I thought, oh, she's not actually a musician. She is a woman who was in the orbit of very famous rock stars and was incredibly influential to them creatively. She was a part of their look, of their just their whole life at the time that they were really at the peak of their fame and their powers. And so as soon as I knew Anka was the subject of the memoir and that the book was going to be bringing Mari into the rock and roll world, it like all just fell into place. And it was so fun to write.
It's interesting too. I just my brain made a connection right now with having Anka and Mari be like the 2 stars of the story. They both, interestingly enough, are more similar than you'd think. They both kind of orbit all of these stories, but in different ways. Like that has been their formative years of their life, is orbiting other people, which is really interesting. So they didn't tend to always connect very well. So I wouldn't say that maybe they were looking for those similarities, but maybe that's part of the reason why it worked so well and why Mari could really understand her as well and get into her brain to write for her.
Oh, thank you for seeing that. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, for all of us bookworms, like we
Mhm.
know that we see a lot more than maybe we get credit for sometimes, right? We're sitting at the
Mhm.
cafe with our book and our coffee. And I think readers and writers are deep thinkers and observers about life and relationships and family. And we're interested in all this stuff. And we're always kind of constantly seeing and hearing what's happening around us while we might not be giving off the vibe that we are. And so Anka, as the girlfriend and wife of these guys, always backstage, always in the limo, but not on the stage. And then Mari, meant to be in the shadows. That's contractually where she's supposed to be. I agree. They're both really observing and probably can see that in each other. But you're right, kind of grudgingly. They're not
Mhm.
necessarily seeing that connection at the beginning. They have a journey that they go on in terms of their relationship.
Mhm. I know I've gotten like a lot of DMs, and we had our Zoom the other day,
Yep.
and everyone especially loves Anka's character. Like they're so fascinated by her. She's super interesting. Of course, we've talked a bit about how incredible the audiobook is. I think Helen does such a like great job specifically with her accent and her voice, where I kept forgetting like it's still the same person voicing the character. She really just nails it out of the park. You've talked a little bit about like of course who she is, and how did you maybe more so develop her character? Was there like some real life inspiration, or you just know that these types of people, of course, exist and you kind of made her her own thing, of course, in the end? Or kind of how did you come up with her? And second part of that question, including Mari here, why did you choose to have both of the main characters in this story, I would say, be female protagonists? Was that kind of an intentional choice, or that's just also who you are in this case?
Yeah, I mean, such
Lots
great
of questions.
questions. That's a lot of questions. Let me start with the first one about Anka. So, because I am such a fan of music, and the band in the book, the Midnight Ramblers, is loosely based on the Rolling Stones,
Mhm.
and I knew that quite famously, the Rolling Stones had some incredible girlfriends and wives. Mick Jagger had Marianne Faithfull, who wrote just a gorgeous memoir called Faithful that's so smart and funny and humble and wise, and is really about the band, but also about being a young female artist, about coming of age in London, about being a mother, all of these things. And then Keith Richards, who loosely influenced the character of Dante in my book, had a really like powerhouse wife named Anita Pallenberg, who is credited often with being the one who kind of influenced him to wear black eyeliner, to wear the scarves around his head, the scarves.
Of course, a woman was behind that.
Of
Of
course, right?
course,
Of course,
naturally.
right. And it could be for people who are obsessed with the band, they know these little
Mhm.
factoids and fun snacks about them. But for other people, she could have been sort of lost to history, right? She's not
Mhm.
as famous as Keith. And then there was another girlfriend of Keith briefly in the 70s named Ushi Obermeyer. And she lives in Topanga Canyon now and apparently is a jewelry maker. I have not met her. I'm kind of too nervous because I just think she is the most. And there's a biopic that was made of her, which I believe is called 8 Miles High. And she had this incredible life and really was only with the Rolling Stones for maybe a few months. And then her real life boyfriend renovated this bus for them, and they traveled all around like India and I believe like Africa, and just had this incredible bohemian life. And I thought, oh, right, like you could have an important relationship with the most important band in the world and still have that just be one thing that you do. And I think for women, even if they are with famous men, it's of course there's so much else that's happening for them, whether they become mothers or not. They have a whole other world that does dovetail with their life with the men, but also is special to them, is private to them. And so that leads to your other question about why I thought it was important to tell the women's stories, because yes, when I was a journalist, I was primarily interviewing men, although it was the early aughts and there were some great female performers like Cat Power, like Rilo Kiley, who were coming up in the indie rock world. And so I did get to spend some time talking with them. But yes, it was mostly men. And
Mhm.
I could also see, though, everyone who was around them, the people they were in relationship with, many of them also had female managers. There were women who worked for the record labels, of course. And we were sort of this tribe because we knew it took our knowledge of music and our smarts and our drive to be in this upper echelon of the rock world. And we knew that maybe even in the early aughts, we weren't taken as seriously as the guys were. I mean, I literally had men say to me, not all the time, but a couple times, like, I can't believe you can like know about music and write about music. And I was like, chicks can know about music too. And I use that term kind of jokingly because I was like, why would you even, I mean, duh.
We also have ears.
Exactly.
It's the whole like, it's like that whole like meme of like a girl's wearing a Nirvana t-shirt and the guy's like, name 5 songs. And you're just like, okay. But like, it's even worse in your case because you literally have the job to back it up. It's like, well, you've gotten hired and this isn't your first job either. Right. So excuse you.
Thank you. You can tell I still got a little chip on my shoulder about
me
that.
Too. I'm like ready to like go to war over here. I'm like, who do I need to find?
And that's the best thing about being an artist is then you just put it all in a book. And at the end of the day, you're like, you know what? I put all of those emotions and the moments of doubt and shame and pride and connection into these characters. And I'm so proud of it. And I do hope that some of the richness of the world comes out of those real life experiences that I had.
I think so. Anytime you're able to like attach those emotions, the reader will definitely feel it. This was something I'd always just like sidebar when I think you say things, my brain goes somewhere, but it's an interesting theory to think about that maybe these types of stories might end up going away, or we might still revert back into like these older eras. Because think about like the WHAAAs, if you will, the wives and girlfriends of today. Now we are so accessible. Like these famous people are posting, a lot of them all the time.
Right.
So they feel there's a lot of more of these like parasocial relationships and people get to know who they are through how they present themselves online. So there's less of this like shrouded mystery of who they are. So I'm curious to see like in 20 years or whatever, when people want stories of this time, like maybe there's just those people who weren't the ones on social media that are getting their, memoirs told or writing their memoirs. Or maybe people just want the stories anyways, because they still want a firsthand experience. But I'm curious how that will shift and evolve over time.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, I'm going to say something juicy that I'm not going to be able to follow up on. So guys, and also you're welcome. Having spent a lot of time around contemporary celebrities, many of whom are online, and I have been in a meeting with someone for their book while they were in a Twitter battle with a very, high-powered pop culture icon, and was watching how they were navigating all of that. But I also know some of the real stories about what are happening behind the scenes of relationships, when there are public couples, what is actually happening, if there are other people on the side, or other things that happen at parties or events that aren't getting posted. And I haven't done a book where someone has decided to like burn it all down and say, actually, we may have posted this, but the truth was, because you have to be so strategic about it. And especially I think as a woman, and Anka talks about that a little bit, or Mari is aware of that for her, that if you're not as famous as the man that you're with, there can be a lot of shade thrown on you for how you talk about him, even if he was a grown-up, made the choices himself, could be expected to take responsibility for them. So I do think you're completely right. Like, we're in a really different era, and we have this illusion of transparency and of truth. And I don't know, I can't speak to every single celebrity because obviously it's so different and it's so individual based on how people feel comfortable and how close they are to their fans. But some of them probably are authentically like crying, and telling the truth. And some of them are probably, like many of us, presenting a slightly more polished version of what their life is like. And I do think it will be an interesting thing to see in the memoirs of the next like 5 or 10 years, if it changes.
You know how in a lot of different novels, there will be like a quote at the beginning of the chapter. Especially I see it a lot with like fantasy. They'll like pull some historical type of little quote and then like it kind of weaves into that chapter. I want that to be like the tweet and them to like break down what was going behind the scenes. That would be so cool.
That is such a good idea for a book.
Anyone can have it. I just want to read it.
All right. Well, I'm going to take it since I'm in the room with you and you can be my consultant. So let me find a celebrity who's really known for either their tweets or their posts, and we'll figure out a way to do that. I love it.
That'd be super fun. Let's get into a little bit of the ghostwriting. This is so fun for me because, as I mentioned, of course, we've met before, but we've always met under circumstances where so much is going on.
Yes.
And every time I leave, I'm like, damn, I really wish I would have gotten to talk to Sarah more. And I always have this like, oh, that sucks feeling. And I'm like, well, if I schedule a live stream with her, she literally has to answer all my questions. So this is perfect. But I have so many questions about ghostwriting. I call this segment the NDA friendly because I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but if there's things you can allude to in a way that doesn't get you in trouble, that is, of course, very fun for us. You've ghostwritten numerous books. I don't know if you can say how many, but how did your experience kind of shape your approach to writing this novel? Were there certain things where you were like, oh, this moment was really juicy in my real life, I would like to add it in here? Or you were like, oh, this is freakishly similar to something that happened, I need to leave some of this out because I don't want to step on toes? Like, did you have to have some of those thoughts, or because it's fiction, you were just like, hee, here we go? Like, how did you approach that?
Well, kind of a mixture of all of those things. And when I was writing the character of Mari, I knew that I wanted her to be a little bit younger because I'm just like so self-realized now. I mean, I've just written so many self-help books for people that I basically have absorbed it all, no, not really. But I did want her to be earlier in her journey, so she had to fight harder as I did when I was younger. And so I based her on myself in 2011. And at that point, I had been ghostwriting for about 3 years. I'd had a little bit of success. And one of the ways that you're gaining success as a ghostwriter is that some of the big houses like Simon and Schuster have a list of approved writers that they give to their celebrities, or they did at the time. I don't know if this is still true. I've kind of gone up to a level beyond that. But at the time, you had to just get on the list, first of all. And then you would be among this group where they're like, okay, we know that they can finish a book. We know that they can hit deadlines. We know that they understand the basic type of relationship that is required to do this work. And so that was great. I was getting fairly regular work, but I hadn't written a New York Times bestseller yet. Now, at this point, having done it for 16 years, 16 years. Gosh, that's crazy. I've ghostwritten 21 books, 5 of which have been New York Times bestsellers. So this was a really important moment for me. And you can kind of tell when you're going into a job interview if the book will probably be a bestseller based on what was happening in the celebrity's life, how famous they are, what kind of tea they're going to spill. And so I knew that this book was going to be a bestseller for a variety of reasons. And so just like Mari, so this all is in the opening of the book, I took my beat up Honda to the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel, which is a very fancy restaurant. I parked around the corner so that the valet could not see how beat up my car was. And I don't even know if I had $20 to actually pay for the valet or whatever it is for this fancy hotel. And I went in and met with this very famous, very sort of regal, beautiful, just almost old-fashioned female celebrity. And I tried to convince her that I could, in fact, write a bestseller for her, although I never had before. And there's something that happens involving a psychic prediction at that lunch, and that did actually happen at my lunch. My character, Mari Hawthorne, is told by her celebrity, Anka, my psychic predicted that I'm going to write a book. It's going to be a bestseller. It's going to be associated with the name like Haw or Han. And she's like, oh, Mari Hawthorne. I'm Mari Hawthorne. That must be me. And she looks over and Goldie Hawn is having lunch at the table. So in my case, this happens. And I look over and Lily Tomlin is having lunch at the table next to me.
What?
And I was like, I mean, number one, I'm a huge Lily Tomlin fan. Number two, I'm like, I think the stars have aligned, and that celebrity, for whatever reason, hopefully because they thought I was a good writer and could do the job, not because Lily Tomlin was at the table next to us and there was a psychic prediction, did hire me to write that book. And it was my first New York Times bestseller. And it really changed the arc of my career. So I can't say who they were, but I've always been grateful to them for taking a risk on me. And I'm so freaking glad that it was a bestseller, because I told them I could do a bestseller, sort of like Mari does it. Like, I can do it. I can do it.
Of course, naturally.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting experience. I did have to chuckle when I read that because, like, I mean, being primarily Arizona based, I don't really have a lot of celebrity encounters. But one thing Tucson, Arizona is known for is they have this like rock and mineral gem show every year. And it's just massive. People come to like buy different types of stones. I don't know. It's not my thing. But
Uh-huh.
I went out for a very nice dinner once, and coincidentally, Goldie Hawn was sitting at the table behind me. And I was like, oh, this is fun little moment in the story. I was like, we had the same almost experience.
I love that. We did. We had the same
Yes,
celebrity sighting. Yep.
absolutely the same.
I cited her in my mind only, but it was real.
It was real to me. All right, let's get into our first little game segment of the
Yes.
day. So this is a themed section for ghostwriting here.
Mhm.
And I will share this comment because it's too good to not share with you. I would love for you to write a memoir, but I have a feeling you've signed a lot of NDAs, so that won't be happening. LOL.
Oh, that's great.
I
Thank
hope
you.
that they all have expiration dates so that
Oh,
eventually that can happen.
that is a good question. I did actually write a memoir. It came out in 2015 and it's called Good Girl. And it's about my relationship with my dad, or my lack of relationship with my dad, which I also gave that character trait to Mari. Unfortunately, as I write about in my memoir, my dad was a gambling addict and like we're pretty sure he's a narcissist, although he's undiagnosed. And so I really spent my childhood trying to have a relationship with him, trying to take care of him emotionally in the way that children and family members of addicts do. And I do think that became a huge part of what I'm able to do as a ghostwriter. Of course, I didn't go into it in any kind of a like a manipulative way. It just happened to be a skill set I had from my childhood that worked really well as a ghostwriter. And just before we play the game, I will tell you, I was recently interviewed for the Hollywood Reporter, where they took me to a dinner with like Neil Strauss, who wrote The Dirt, which was the Motley Crue memoir, which is like one of the most famous rock memoirs ever. And all of these, Hillary Lifton, all of these really famous ghostwriters who've done like between all of us at the table, they had done probably among the top celebrity memoirs of like the past 10 years. And I mentioned something about my dad being a narcissist, and Neil Strauss says, "Oh, I'm the child of a narcissist too." And someone else at the table said, "Oh, me too." And obviously I would never out anyone for that, but if
Yeah.
they felt comfortable saying that, and we just laughed, because there is this certain quality, and that is not in any way to say that celebrities are narcissists. It's just
No.
a certain way that you have to get very close to someone and be good at really reading their moods, really intuiting how they're feeling. Because as a ghostwriter, it's not just about the relationship of sitting and talking with them and interviewing them like you do as a journalist. Eventually, you have to be them. There's a moment when you have to understand them so well that you sit down and you put their words on the page in a way that is emotionally resonant. And you know, as a reader, you can tell if it's real. Like when the books work, there is this sort of gelling between the ghostwriter and the celebrity, and it should be seamless. It should be invisible. It's very hard to do, and it's incredibly intoxicating when it goes well. And so, anyhow, that's a long way to say all of that and my messy rock journalism past is in my memoir, Good Girl. But it kind of stops right when I'm becoming a ghostwriter. So maybe I'll write a second memoir someday. Thank you for the encouragement.
That's so interesting. I mean, I guess like any career, there's going to be, you know, the top people who perform really well at that career, but it's interesting to figure out if they have like character traits in common. Like there is, you know, obviously some of it is like an attraction where like certain people who have gone through certain things are going to be attracted to certain things. But I also do think there is probably some personality things there. Like if you grew up with, you know, a narcissist in your family, you've probably navigated some complicated relationships from a very young age. You've learned how to finesse that well. And you've unfortunately had to learn a lot of hard lessons, probably like not taking things super seriously or not
Yes.
personally.
Yes.
And certain things like that. Whereas when I was reading a lot of this book and just thinking about like, I always like to put myself in someone else's shoes. I'm like, if I was a ghostwriter, like, I think I would be like offended every single day. Like I would have to get over that real quick. And I'm sure you learned that lesson quickly, but I think that would be one of the hardest parts for me is to not like be like, oh, this isn't like my story, my thing. Not that I would be taking over, but it would just be a really hard dynamic to work through. So it impresses me that you can navigate it so well.
Oh, thank you, my dear.
Of course. All right, for something a little silly and fun,
Yes.
I've come up with a couple different names. So instead of being a ghostwriter, if forevermore you had to pick a new term to
Okay.
identify with, I've got a list. Most of them are alliterations because that's my favorite. I love an alliteration. All right, are you going to be a phantom penman, a spirit scribe, a shade descriptor? I like Spectre Scribbler. I like the
I like
uh,
those feel like though like someone who would be standing at the gates of like
yes.
purgatory, like writing down people's names as they come through.
Ooh,
I feel like there's a little bit of an underworld vibe
it's
to
a
those.
little creepier for sure. A wraith wordsmith, an apparition author. Got a couple more. A ghoul grammarian. Is that how we say that?
See, that one I would not use because I probably couldn't pronounce it either, and then I'd be
Yeah,
embarrassed every time. I would be like, "I'm a Google blah, 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 blah."
same. I'm like, I'm a reader, not a speaker. Let's not judge me on this. Poltergeist penster or banshee bard.
I would go with Banshee Bard because I just think that is so badass to put another in there. And I love the word banshee. I love the band Susie and the Banshees. I love the word bard. I love Shakespeare the Bard. I went to college at Bard. I mean, I think we have a winner. I think we have a
It's the
winner.
one that I put it down and I was like, this is the one most like your handle and most like rock star, you know?
Yeah. That's the
I
thing. It has the gravitas. It makes me feel like I've got a little bit of sparkle to me too, not just a celebrity.
You can update your bio with it later.
I think my agent would be like, you want me to send this to the top editor at Simon and Schuster? Okay. The time was to send you on vacation.
You're like, what? What? She's lost it. She's officially finally lost it. Oh, all right. I came up with another kind of ghostwritery game.
Yeah.
I feel like this will be really interesting because we'll learn a bit more about, I don't know, I guess just who you admire. So often in life, people play this game of like, who would you love to have dinner with, dead or alive? And for the sake of the game, we'll say like table of five. But I want to put a ghostwriter spin on that. So who would you like to write a memoir with, dead or alive? And you can also pick five. Me like,
I mean, I have to say, it's already been done and it was done so well. I would have loved to have done Keith Richards' memoir. I just, out of all of the Rolling Stones, he's my favorite. As I say, if we share my Spotify playlist with people, he is my favorite songwriter out of the Rolling Stones. There are a few songs he's sort of credited with, although he writes most of the songs with Mick as a duo. There's one called You Got the Silver, which I just think is such a great love song, sexy blues. And I devoured his book. I thought he was funny and humble and came through a lot of tough drug addiction. I mean, people like to joke about him sort of being this like bumbling drug addict, but it's not fun or funny to be a drug addict. And he, I think, managed to come out of it really gracefully, as far as I can tell, a great husband, a great father. And that was one of the things about the character of Dante that surprised me the most, was when I realized that he cares about his kids more than anything else. And that surprised me. I was like, oh gosh, he's like,
is that what you think?
yeah, exactly. And that to me made him a real person. That was when I was like, oh, he's not just a rock star. He's not just someone I imagined. He is having dinner with his kids right now. Like that's when the characters continue to exist off the page. So that's the one I wish I had written. I would love to do Stevie Nicks' book. I'm not sure that she ever will do one. But she is just so phenomenal, so talented. Obviously, the stories that we even know of are just bonkers. She also wrote the song Sarah, which is one of my favorite Sarah songs. I would love to know the story. There's a rumor about what it was written about, which I don't know if it's true or not. So I would just love to do that. I also was a huge Hole fan when I was a teenager. And apparently Courtney Love has been working on her memoir for a number of years. And I have been considered for it. I never have actually met with her. I love her so much that I may be a little too close to the material, I think. And also, I just was of the generation where I was really living it in real time when it happened. Like when Kurt died, I just remember that. Whereas with Stevie Nicks, I'm so passionate about her. I have such respect for her as an artist, but I wouldn't be in the story as much. And of course, to be the ghost, I can't be in the story. You know, it'd be one thing for me to write a memoir about growing up with Courtney Love as an influence and respecting her and admiring her and sometimes being confused by her and all of the things I think people do who have watched her in public. But I don't know that I could be a good ghost for her, but I would, you know, I would love the opportunity to at least sit and talk with her at some point.
That's cool. If I was a ghostwriter, I'm going to pick Taylor Swift.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, she's going to have some amazing stories. I loved her documentary that she did. I thought it was so interesting, just watching her writing songs.
The way that she writes, I'm convinced that one day we'll get some sort of book. It might not be like a memoir, or for all we know, it could already exist and she just hid under a pen name because she'll do that anyways. So
yeah, definitely. Not to interrupt you, but another favorite, it's funny, I guess it's all these women. So there's a reason that I'm drawn to women musicians, women artists, women story, but I am actually friends with Lucinda Williams, who's an incredible, you know, songwriter and musician. And I had been bugging her for years, you know, to write a memoir for me to help her. And she ended up going and writing it herself. And I do believe she had some editorial help. I don't know the specifics of it. She's living in Nashville now with her husband, and I don't get to see her as much, unfortunately. But I just thought that book was so beautiful. It's poetic. It's really honest in a loving way about some mental health issues that her mom had, which I think is a very difficult thing to write about as the child of some difficult circumstances, to be able to come to it at a later age with some grace and give some grace to the parents who were struggling. So that's a book I really recommend. I wish I could say that I had written it, but she did a great job without me.
Honestly, it's one of those things where I've become such an audiobook girl, but I've really enjoyed this phase of like celebrity memoirs right now, especially when they narrate their own stories.
Yes.
Like there is something so powerful about hearing them tell their own stories. Like two of them that are like more so people that I grew up with, of course, are Paris Hilton and Jeanette McCurdy. Both of their stories they narrated. And I remember just being like, almost like I needed to just like lay on the floor to process. I was just like, wow, because both of them, like you'd objectively see on the outside, think that they had these like wonderful, easy breezy lives. They're beautiful women who are very accomplished and probably very rich, I would assume. And so you would think on, you know, on paper, like, oh, this might not be the most interesting story, but they went through so much hardship and they both are so strong, and like they've really, really came out on the other side. I mean, of course, they're still going through it as always, but it's very interesting to be in this era where we get these audiobooks and their stories. So this is my little plug to tell you, if anytime you have someone you're working with that's flip-flopping on if they can do the audiobook, just beg on behalf of readers. It's so important to us. We love it so much.
It's so intimate, especially I think most of us listen to our audiobooks with our headphones. And so you really feel like they're talking to you in this very personal way. I have not listened to Paris's book yet, but I did also listen to I'm Glad My Mom Died. And I mean, it's just, it's funny. It's raw. I felt like she was my best friend. And I was sad when it ended. And I agree with you that like even someone like my narrator, Helen, who is so gifted, I'm sure would have done an incredible job and also gotten at the emotion and the humor of that book. But there's just nothing better than someone telling it in their own voice.
And even with wonderful writing, sometimes like tones can still be misconstrued. So the fact of like someone being able to narrate their own story, like there's less wiggle room of like what did they mean by that, because you hear it so personally. It's just incredibly interesting. Or even in the case of like Britney Spears's memoir, of course she's gone through more trauma than most, and she didn't choose to narrate her book because it was too painful for her. She just did like a small intro. But I think it's Michelle Williams who narrated her book, and she did. I don't know. I guess that's just her voice, but they actually sound a bit alike, which I thought was really interesting. I'm like, I wonder if that's something publishers would do more, if in a situations like that they could choose someone who almost sounds like them. So then you are still getting a bit of that experience for those who it is too painful for them to, rehash it all. Once they've written it all out, they're like, all right, I just need to be done. I need to.
Yeah, well, and it's so interesting too, because it makes me think about ghostwriting. It is one of the few jobs where sometimes I will go into a meeting and talk about, say, my dad being an addict, and you would not normally lead with that if you were trying to be like the president of a bank. But when you're telling someone, I know you have been through some stuff, I know it's very vulnerable and sometimes scary to be real about it, especially if you have had sort of a shiny persona where people just assume it's fabulous and you're rich and you're having a great time all the time. And I think I can only imagine, and of course I don't know Michelle Williams, I only know what we've learned about her publicly and some of her own troubles. Like, I can imagine that she put a lot of her own struggles and experiences into that reading and narration. And I would think that if they met, which I'm sure they did, her and Brittany, as they were deciding to work together and what it would be like, that there's a real human connection. And again, that brings me back to the power of books and just storytelling and how we can really relate to each other, especially about some of the more difficult chapters of our lives.
That reminds me, we will have time for some audience Q&A, so pop them in there and I will make sure to get them at the end. I saw a comment come through, so keep them coming. What was I going to say? It's very interesting because it's so much different than any other genre. Like memoirs it's all personal entirely. And then of course, bringing in a ghostwriter, like so many of these people that are telling these stories, they're wildly talented, but of course writing might not be their particular thing, or writing in this type of format, in this style. So it's great to have to bring someone in, but it's almost like hiring a therapist or something, because like you're just telling your whole life story and you need to trust someone with that. And of course, yes, there's technically this paperwork, these things, these contracts where you're not allowed to talk about it, but that doesn't make it any less vulnerable. They still have to tell this to you and they don't know you. So it makes sense that you almost kind of like have to be like, hey, my life isn't all sunshine and rainbows too. Like, here's something about me so you feel comfortable, like a little bit going there. We can kind of bond over it, or at least feel like we're on somewhat more of an equal footing. So it's really
yeah, completely. I think that's a really good point. And I do think, I'm just going to take a quick segue out of that, because you bring up one of the things that was most important for me in terms of my goal for the book, like on a more thematic or a deeper level. I would have found it so easy and, to me, sort of lazy to just make fun of celebrities. When I meet people at parties and they find out I'm a ghostwriter, or I meet people at book conferences or whatever, a lot of times their first reaction is like, celebrities are so dumb. Like, all they do is just like shop and play golf and stuff. And A, that's not true. And B, I do think most of the celebrities who actually are drawn to write a memoir, because not everyone is and not everyone will, do have something that they've struggled with. They are, as you pointed out, incredibly talented and accomplished in other areas. They just haven't had the privilege of the education that I had. Like, I knew I wanted to be a writer from a very young age. I was lucky enough to get to go to an excellent university and study with great professors. Not that that's the only way to become a writer. You can become a writer by just reading a ton, and listening out in cafes. But I have all of that background. So of course I know how to put a book together in a way that someone who's maybe been touring or acting in a TV show since they were 12 wouldn't need to be expected to do. And so when I was working on the book and thinking about the celebrities I wanted to write, that's partly why I created the characters of Anka and Dante with such care, because I wanted them to be people who were worth getting to know, who weren't just about their shiny veneer, who actually had something to teach Mari and the reader. So it like literally warmed my heart that people are telling you how much they love Anka. And because I think with me, not that no one has said that to me, but I think people get so interested in the character of Mari when they're talking to me, because it's a doorway into the topic of ghostwriting. But I think the final thing I'll say is that as I did the writing, the prologue, How to Be a Ghost, is one of the last pieces of writing I did when the book was finished. And that is when the topic of ghostwriting is being introduced. And it's sort of this primer for how ghosts function and how ghosts think. And there's this line in there where they say that a ghost must love all their clients unconditionally. And when I discovered that, I realized it was true, that I do have love for my clients. And probably it's like having love for our exes, in that, like, you have something really powerful and intimate with them. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not as good, but I'm grateful for all of them. I've learned things from all of them. And then having worked with the 20 or even more than that, if you add in all the book proposals I've done, like the 40 of them all together, it's been such an interesting and privileged view of like life, of just this really fascinating, obviously it's just one segment of life, Hollywood and sports and entrepreneurship and the areas that I've written about, but it's incredible. I feel really lucky to have had it as a job and a way of life for almost 2 decades now.
Wild. You kind of alluded to this a little bit about how it's interesting because people focus on Mari, where you don't hear as much about Anka. And you've shared how in public people often say kind of these same kind of questions about ghostwriting or have these same like reactions. Is there something that you often wish they would ask you about? Like if you're like, oh, this is really what it's like why aren't people asking about this part? Or this seems so obvious, like this is what I would ask. Is there something that you often think about, like, why don't I get to talk about that part of it as much?
I think it's funny because I've probably been asked some version of this question. My book came out in February, and so I've been talking about it quite a bit, but I don't know that I've thought about it in quite this way before. So you asked me just the right question at just the right moment. And what I will say is that there's also sometimes a little bit of snobbery about the writing in some of these memoirs. And even the narrator at the beginning of my book says, oh, no one's claiming to be Chekhov over here. It doesn't have to be the best writing. But I do think the writing is great and just what it needs to be to represent that person's voice and point of view. But often it's not just about the writing and the prose, it's about the level of observation. It's about the insights that the person is having. And I think to do that well is even harder sometimes than being a good writer. And I think a lot of the celebrities I've worked with, especially people who have been actors, who have to spend so much time thinking about what makes a character tick, what makes someone do something at their best, at their worst. Often they've worked with really experienced actors who've been masters of the craft and masters of self-expression. I think there are aspects of storytelling and of book making that don't get credit. And I think it's so important to honor that. And I guess I wish that I would be asked about that. It's interesting, when I came to your book club a couple months ago, we were talking about Tia Williams, 7 Days in June. Someone made a point that not all writing has to be the most rarefied, elevated, quote, best writing to be deeply moving, to be entertaining, to be fun, to create a connection with the reader. And so I think there's space for all kinds of storytelling, all kinds of books. And I guess sometimes I wish there was a little bit more space to celebrate that when I'm talking about it. So I guess I just did.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And I think I really liked how you said that you have to like almost, not in a romantic way, but like fall in love with each person that you work with, because how else are you going to be able to tell their story from the right place if you're not doing it with anything but love? If you're coming in with, your own prejudices or your own feelings, or, taking in maybe their public feelings, or, there's so many other ways that you could navigate it where the story's not going to come across properly. But if you're going in with these feelings of love and approaching it with compassion, and instead just kind of letting them, I guess, speak and just helping facilitate it, I feel like that would, as someone who's never done it, that seems like the right way to go. And I think that's just really incredible.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing quickly too, which you bring up that's interesting, or that it brings me to, is that we're also not alone in the process. We
Yeah.
have an editor, and
Mhm.
they're sort of the adult in the room. And I had a great editor once who would say, "Oh, we would hand in some pages and there'd be something in it, and they would say, oh, that doesn't pass the humility test." And they would remind us that, we are trying to connect with readers, and there are a million ways to say something, and you do have to be thoughtful of how you present yourself. And so the editors, I think, are our first readers. So we do kind of go into this wonderful creative place of just, there's no bad ideas, and like, let's really express what that was like, and let's get into the feeling. And then the editor's like, okay, hold on now. Like, we have to think about this being a book, and we have to think about it having an arc, and we have to think about it being paced well, and we have to think about it having payoff. And this scene doesn't make sense to me, or this goes on way too long. I know you had a lot of fun writing it, but for the reader, it doesn't need to be 20 pages. And so that has also been one of the best parts of being a ghostwriter, is that I am someone who loves books, has always loved books. And I got to spend most of my career after I left journalism working with some of the best editors in the business, at Simon and Schuster, at Day Street, at Scribner, at these different presses, where these are really smart people who also love books and love storytelling. And so I've learned so much from working with them as well.
That's so cool. I could just like geek out about this all day. It's so interesting.
It'll be a 4-hour book club. Everyone will be like, is it time for lunch yet? I need to go to dinner.
We're hungry. I need to be. On a less kind of serious in the weeds note, this is one question I ask every author that I get the chance of hosting. I often like to ask, because I know a lot of you all have resources already for other writers. So I'm like, well, let's just connect on the reader level. So as a fellow reader, I love to ask for book recommendations from authors, because then once again, you get to know a little bit more of their personality and see what they love to read. But I've made it a step further now on this series, where I have to read one of your recommendations. So you can recommend 1 to 3 books, and whatever one of those books, I'll choose one and start reading it within the next week.
Okay. So since we do have a personal relationship, I'm going to lead with a question.
Okay.
There was a Palm Springs Readers Fest back in February, and I was there with a bunch of other great writers, including Stephen Rowley, who I know is going to be your next book club pick, and his husband Byron, and my friend Sarah Langan, who is in my writers group, was there, and her book A Better World just came out on April 9th. Do you know her? Have you read it yet?
No, no.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to make that the pick.
Okay.
So I'm in this wonderful writers group with a writer named Meg Howry, who wrote an incredible book called They're Going to Love You, about a retired ballet dancer and her relationship with her estranged father. Sarah Langan, who I'm going to get to in a second. J. Ryan Stradle, who writes incredible books about the Midwest. And, we all write in these very different genres and these very different worlds, although they're all character driven. And then Chris Terry, who writes a lot about pop culture and about race and about punk. And he wrote a great book called Black Card about just growing up as a young man in America. It's a novel, but it's really funny and deep. And so my writing is made so much better by all of these friends and peers, and we show each other our manuscripts early. And so Sarah's book is the one I'm the most excited about, because it's just came out April 9th. It's called A Better World. And it's slightly dystopian, but as she says, it's kind of like the world is falling apart, which it is right now. So she's like, you don't have to like turn the knob that far to get to where we are in my book. And the parents at the heart of A Better World get this opportunity to go and live in this company town that's owned by this very big company, very rich company. And so they kind of go behind the wall. There's no money. Everything is beautiful and clean. And their children are going to get to go to the best school. They're not going to have to worry about violence or about illness. And then, of course, they get there and they're like, is something weird going on here? This seems too good to be true. Yeah, I think something weird is going on here. And so the mom especially is trying to figure out what's happening. is it worth being there in order to have this great life for her children? It's so well written. It's a little spooky. It's thoughtful. It's great.
All right, I'm in. I mean,
Yes.
I was in either way, but now I'm
Because you have to. Because you're like, I honor my commitments, and I've said I'm going to do it.
And I think I went through a long phase of like, I mean, of course, just reading kind of whatever I wanted or reading things for certain deadlines and certain projects. But I'm in this phase right now where I love reading things that are people's recommendations because I feel like I get to like bond with them over that. And I'm really enjoying that because that's not really something I did before because I was too busy reading whatever I wanted. And I was like, wait, this is actually a really nice way to approach reading beyond just books.
Well, I'm going to give you one other recommendation. That is a personal recommendation. So because my book is a mystery, I get to go to all these wonderful crime writers conferences. We have Left Coast Crime, we have BoucherCon. And so these are meant to be fan conferences, and we do panels and people come and ask us questions about, mysteries. And gosh, there'll be a panel on like how to poison someone. I mean, it's fascinating. Like it's really the most fun conference you can go to. So as you probably know from going to some conferences, when people have books come out at the same time, they kind of get on the circuit together, and it's fun. You get to check in and see how's it going. How was it when you went over here? How was it when you were over there? So I met this wonderful writer actually in Tucson. She was on one of the other panels I was on, not your panel. Her name's Margot, Margot, Dahui. I wrote it down because I'm butchering it. Douaihy. And she wrote a great book called Scorched Grace. And it's the first in a series that is published by Gillian Flynn's imprint. So obviously got a huge stamp of approval from one of the great thriller writers of our generation. And it's so interesting. The main character is a queer nun who had to get sober and kind of leave behind her life that she had ruined. So she goes to work in this convent in New Orleans, and she starts solving mysteries there. And it's really an homage to some of the like classic like hard-boiled mysteries of like Raymond Chandler, like people who were creating the form of the sort of noir hard-boiled detective. So we have this person who's in that school of detecting, except for there you go.
I was like, I remembered the cover and I was like, I have to show you guys because the cover looks like stained glass and it's so cool.
Isn't it gorgeous? And then Margot is just so smart, such a great literary citizen, so interesting. And the second book in the series has just come out. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I just love this moment we're in where there's just so many great different writers and characters, and clearly Margot's obsessions with New Orleans and with like hard-boiled classic noir and with like queer history and visibility and all this stuff just make for such an interesting, unique world. And I'm just thrilled to be able to like read her and get to know her, and can't recommend her highly enough.
Cool. I'm excited because I was curious about those. I saw the cover and I was like, I'm gonna sidebar this for later. And now knowing someone's read it, I'm like, all right, I'm even more in. All right. Are you okay if we go a couple minutes over for the audience?
Yeah, please.
Okay. And I know
tell everyone to get a snack. Everyone get a snack.
All right. To set the pace, we're last thing that we're gonna do, and then I'll start sharing their questions. I wanted to make you do my little mood game that I made up, my Moody Readers game. So if you guys follow our book club Instagram, I like to post it's very dorky, but it's very fun. I'll pick our book of the month, and then I will just show the expressions that I made while reading, all of the moods that it made me feel. So I wrote a list of like words and phrases, and Sarah doesn't get to say any words. She just has to make a face of how this makes her feel. So maybe some of them she wants to not react because she's scared, but we'll see. All right. First one is deadline pressure. Celebrity client. Oh, I like that. Weird research. Confidentiality. Pseudonym. She's like, I'm not gonna give much. Revisions. Creative differences. Book launch.
I went from this to hugging because I don't want to make it
You
seem
got
like
there.
I'm
You
too
got
difficult. Okay,
I
sorry.
like
What was the next one? I spoke over you.
book launch.
Was that close to was that too close to when I was on deadline? I think they're a little the same. It's kind of like this
Yeah, they're
hysteria.
still both.
It's like
Yeah, there's.
it's a fun hysteria.
And then let's do our last one, ghostwriter perks. I like it. I like it. It's cute. See, how else would have you gotten to have this type of experience all over the place? We're just playing all the games here.
So fun. I love it.
All right. We've got a question about how you ended up becoming a ghostwriter specifically. I know we've talked a little bit about your early days, but how exactly did you break in to the career?
So I moved to Los Angeles in 2006 because I always say I fell in love with Los Angeles like you fall in love with a person. I just was completely smitten. And I got here and was doing a little bit of music journalism for the LA Times, but I was really struggling. I was working as a cater waiter. I was tutoring kids for the SATs. I was so broke. And a friend of a friend was up for a book with Tila Tequila, if you remember her.
Yeah, of course.
A Shot of Love. And the friend who was a ghostwriter who was considered for that book had started teaching meditation and was getting into doing more wellness books. And I believe has worked with maybe I shouldn't be outing other ghostwriters for who their clients are, but has worked with a lot of the the top sort of lifestyle brand ambassadors and women who do diet and lifestyle books. And so as much as she respected Tila, was like, that's where I'm moving away from. So I met with Tila and she hired me, and that I can actually talk about because I got credit on that book. And that was one of those experiences where our editor was this wonderful, smart man named Brant Rumble. And we were at Scribner, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster. And he had edited this guy called Chuck Klosterman, who is a pop culture critic and writer that I love. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I get to, work with this editor who's so smart, I'm going to learn so much about writing. And Tila was great. She was so, just so thoughtful and wanted it to be a good book. Like she cared about it. Yes, there were a lot of bikini shots in it. Yes, I know she's gone on to have sort of a questionable public life that I'm not a part of, don't know anything about, but I'm so grateful to her for just giving me a shot and hiring me that first time.
That's really interesting to know, like, where you started. And I don't know, life is all about connections too. So you needed someone to open that door so that, you could continue staying in that lane, which is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say as a side note, as a thank you to the woman, Amelie, who was up for that job and didn't take it, I did actually take her meditation class that she was offering, which was sort of like a type of transcendental meditation. And I still meditate to this day. So it probably has helped me with my ghostwriting. So
you have to thank her again.
I do actually, because it was like she gave me the trade and she gave me the tools to not completely lose my mind while I did it. So thank you, Amelie.
That's really cool. It's interesting because I feel like for her, I mean, I don't know her obviously, but I'm sure that was a small moment where she was like, well, I can't do this, so I think you would be great. And like, you forever changed your life by a moment of kindness. So I just think that's really cool. This is a question I saw also on our Instagram stories when I asked if anyone had questions that couldn't attend live and would watch the replay. And I wanted to ask you this as well. So this is great that it came up a few times. How did you deal with writing a book and giving someone else getting the credit? What are words?
Well, so this is really interesting because it doesn't honestly bother me. And so I think I just must have the right personality to be a ghostwriter, because I would say this is probably the question I get asked the most. I will be candid about the fact that I don't
expressions right now. Those are the real moods. I'm like,
because I'm like, how can I say this and not sound like a big egomaniac? So I love that they get credit for their own story and their own life,
Yeah,
which is usually completely remarkable. And they did things I never could have done, in terms of fighting their way to the top of Hollywood or to the top of their industry or whatever it is. But I've always wanted to be on the Jumbotron in Times Square, which I think happens if you go on Good Morning America or if you have your books really splashed out by your publisher. And most of my clients get to go on Good Morning America and they get to be on the Jumbotron in Times Square. So I'm not jealous of the credit, but I would like to someday be on the Jumbotron in Times Square.
All right. All right. We'll manifest this for you.
And you want to know, this probably says a little bit more about my personality too. One thing that actually does bother me is I've been incredibly blessed and have had the opportunity to work on almost every book I've interviewed for. But of course, we cannot get all of the jobs because it is a little bit like dating, and the celebrity needs to just completely feel at one with their ghostwriter. And that's such a personal thing. I couldn't be that for every single person, right?
Yeah.
But often my family knows, like, if I'm going for an interview with someone and that we've gone through the process, and my mom's a big reader, she's a retired librarian, and she'll say to me, "Oh, Sarah, I saw that book, the one you didn't get, the like blah, blah, blah."
Mothers, it's always the moms, I swear.
And I think she's being kind in that, like, she knew I was interested in it, but I'm like, I don't want to hear about that. That's again, like the ex. It's like, I don't want to know that they got married. I hope they're happy. I hope it goes well, but I don't want to hear about it.
It's also a lot different, I'm sure, for you, like meeting other ghostwriters and hanging out with other writers, because it's technically much more competitive too.
Yep.
So I don't know. I'm someone who's really competitive, so I feel like I would have to just be cordial and like be acquaintances with them, but those probably would not be my friends. I don't like to be friends with someone who's too much in my own lane because it gives me weird feelings, because I'm like, I don't want them to feel sad if I get an experience they don't, or vice versa. I know that can probably be tricky as well.
Well, I mean, thankfully, one of my dear close friends, Caroline Ryder, is also a successful ghostwriter. Luckily, we started out around the same time, but she took a break to go to USC Film School for screenwriting for a while. And so, whereas I've ghostwritten 21 books, I think she's ghostwritten 4 or 5. And so we're just in slightly different points in our career. So obviously she's also incredibly talented and really great at what she does. We're just not often sent for the same books anymore. Yeah. So that is helpful because we can commiserate. And in fact, I will tell you a funny story. So we have another friend, Steffi, who's a writer who does more journalism. And when she read the character of Mari, she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm a little worried for Mari. She's on such a tight deadline. She's drinking all this caffeine. She's drinking wine. She's in Las Vegas. She's not sleeping. Like, she feels like she's just."
You're like, yeah, that's my life.
And I was talking to Caroline about that. And she said, "Oh my gosh, do you remember when I ghost wrote my first book and I had to stay up and I ate freeze ground coffee crystals?"
Oh my God.
So I do think you have to have the right personality to be a ghostwriter. If that appeals to you, amazing. You're going to do great, kid. If not, maybe not the job for you.
Think about how well you worked on group projects back in school days. Oh, interesting question here too. Should we just assume that all celebrity, I'm guessing we mean memoirs, are ghost written?
That is
what
a
would
good
you say
question.
Percentage wise, maybe?
I would say probably 80 or 90% are ghost written.
It was going to be high.
But I will say I do get hired sometimes, and I will be very candid about this. Like, there's a wonderful actress, Katie Seagal, who was Peg Bundy on Married with Children. She also was on Sons of Anarchy. She's had an incredible career as a songwriter. She was best friends with Pee Wee Herman in college. They happened to go to the same art school together. And she wrote a beautiful book of essays called Grace Notes. And she hired me to be almost like an editorial consultant. I was a bridge between her editor at Gallery Books and herself. And she took about 3 years to write that book of essays. And we would have regular meetings where I would talk to her about writing and about prose and about scene versus description. And so if I ever say, "Oh, I'm friends with Katie and I've worked with her," I make it very clear that she did all the writing herself, because she really did. She worked very hard on it. So there are also people who have that kind of a job. So I would say some of the books that aren't ghostwritten do have like an editorial liaison like that who comes in. And then sometimes something that happens, which I think makes sense when you think about it, is a really big celebrity might just be super fascinating to the editor who acquires the book. And so sometimes if they are really dedicated to writing it themselves, like let's say I bet Taylor Swift would write her own book if she were to get the opportunity. Sometimes the editor will be so excited to work with them that they will give them a little bit of extra time and attention to make the book really good. And again, it's not, let's say if we're doing a hypothetical Taylor Swift book, it's not any shade on her. It just would be that this editor has so much experience of what makes a book work. And Taylor has so much experience of writing, but not specifically a book length work. And so sometimes the editor will make it kind of their passion project for the year or for part of the year to help this celebrity get it over the finish line and be as good as it can be. So I do think there's a lot of those different types of scenarios that happen. Now, when you go to the acknowledgments page of any celebrity's memoir, there's usually a paragraph where they thank the people at their editorial house. Like they thank their editor, they thank the publicity team. If there is a ghostwriter, that person is often thanked around then. And it's usually not specifically related to writing, but something, having to do with the editorial process. So if you want to try to find who the ghostwriter is, that's usually where you'll find their name.
And kind of like add-on question to this one, a lot of celebrities, or I shouldn't say a lot, but many celebrities also write non-memoirs. There are some fiction stories out there, and people are hired to ghostwrite those too as well, right?
Yes, I have ghostwritten one novel. It's very hard to do.
Yes. I was like, you hinted at this once.
It's very, very hard to do because when you think about it, a memoir, the story of like your wedding night or the story of your big breakthrough, like it's a story that you tell. You say, oh, and then my mom said this, and then my dad did that, and then my dress got stuck in the car. If it's a novel, even this person I worked with was very smart, was very dedicated to the process, helped me do a detailed outline that we sold the book on. But then I had to sit down and think, oh, well, this is a scene where the character goes and does this. And then I'm like, well, what happens? What does it look like? What do they say? And there's just so much that you have to make up from scratch. It's much, much harder.
Honestly, when you had hinted about this, I think you had talked to one of my friends at Tucson Festival of Books, and then we were in a signing line and we were all like talking about this. And I was like, no, this is a very strong opinion, but it is my opinion. I was like, this should be illegal. They should not be able to hire a ghostwriter for a fiction story because it's so complicated unless they hit like certain marks. Like they need to have like, these certain formats of the story, because at that point, like, you're not even writing. I don't know. I feel passionately about this for some reason, but it is very odd to navigate, I'm sure, having to write fiction because it's a less obvious route to take. It's not I don't know. It just sounds really complicated, and I'm not a big fan of that
and for me, it was honestly, I enjoyed working with that client, but it was probably the most difficult for me also in that I'm so passionate about fiction. And yes, I've written a memoir as well. I do care. But obviously, if I got too invested in my celebrity's story as a memoirist, that would be a little creepy. Whereas as a novelist, I had a lot of emotion involved in different aspects of the storytelling or the character development. And it was harder for me to step back and say, oh, yes, this is your book and that is your instinct. And therefore, that is the way we're going to go. So it's interesting. I don't know that it's quite as common as it was for celebrities to do novels. I haven't been approached about doing one in a while, and I'm kind of.
I feel like it's like a new thing. I feel like it's happening more now, like especially in the romance genre. Like, Hannah Brown from The Bachelor just wrote one. I haven't read it yet. I know Haley Kiyoko wrote like a young adult romance, which I own both of those. I will get to eventually, but then I'm like curious. I don't know. I'm more inclined to believe when someone was, like a songwriter or something, that like they are probably writing more. I don't know. It's obviously all very individual, and this is me just speculating, but it is like interesting when they don't have any sort of writing background and they're so busy, because being a celebrity, you're very busy. You have all these engagements and things to do. So I'm like, where did they find the time to write a book? I'm suspicious. All right, last audience question we have here. Does it depend on the person how involved they actually are in their book? Maybe you can go into a little bit of like the specifics here where like even in of course our mood read here,
Yep.
sometimes you show up and there's going to be tons of material already written to work with. Or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes maybe there's a little bit of nothing and now it's just voice recording, getting it in person. Like how does that kind of work and how's it been in your experience?
It's always completely different. Sometimes the book is sold with a lot of material. Sometimes the editor has a really specific idea of what they want it to be. Sometimes it's like, just go have fun, and definitely all of the celebrities have different in levels of involvement, different levels of passion for it. I did have one client once who I worried that they might not actually read the book before it came out. And I just wanted them to read it at least once. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, and I do think there's been some studies on this, I'm not an expert, but I think a lot of celebrities, especially actors, have dyslexia. It's interesting. I don't know if that's partly
I've
why.
heard that a lot. Like with scripts, there's a lot of them have
Yep.
issues because of that.
Yep. And so I have worked with a client who had dyslexia, who now that there are these reading programs that can read even like a Microsoft Word document, it helped him a lot. But so anyhow, I'm not throwing shade on anyone for not literally being able to read, especially if they've had a learning disability and then also did not go to school. Like they were on sets when they were growing up. And so maybe they had a tutor. So anyhow, again, there's so many different scenarios that can happen. But yes, every client of mine has read the book at least once before they went out to do publicity for it. And I am so grateful for that. I have heard rumors about people not reading their books before they come out. I do not know if that's true or not. I cannot speak to that. But then kind of to go back to what you were just saying, there are also celebrities who just are super overachievers and love to do everything and try everything. Like I also have had clients who just absorb books, usually listening to them, but just almost more than I do, right? They're just
Yeah.
constantly up on what's coming out. And sometimes they're in their dressing room and they're writing on their phone. I think especially now that everyone is always carrying phones with them, I encourage people to send me texts, to send me middle of the night emails, because anything they write down, even if it's sort of stream of consciousness, even if it's not well developed enough to actually go onto the page as written, is still the most their voice we can get, right? Because it's them
Yes.
writing down their thoughts. So it completely varies. And I do think, again, that's part of the intuitive aspect of it and the relationship aspect of the job, is just trying to figure out what's going to help someone to have the best experience they can have and to get the material down as well as we can.
I think I would have so many. Every time you say something, I'm like, I could not be a ghostwriter. I'm like, I'm too much of like a perfectionist. So like, I can just imagine having to work with someone and they have this like certain tone and we need to make it sound like their voice. But I'm just like, can we punch it up a level? Like I would just be struggling with these certain things. So your patience is unmatched. All right. So next up, I'm going to give everybody some reminders of what we've got going on. So as we said earlier, our June mood read is by Stephen Rowley. So we did read The Guncle, which is book one. So if you haven't read book one, I highly recommend. And now book two, The Guncle Abroad, is recently out. I think it's like a week or two old now. So we'll be reading that for June. And if you are an audiobook lover like me, Stephen narrates both of them and does a really, really good job. So highly recommend the audiobook. And I am also hosting later in June, I believe it's the 22nd, that Saturday. I am hosting another live stream for my romance author series, which I call Forced Proximity because I'm forcing them to hang out with me. And the authors joining me for that are Sajni Patel, Taj McCoy, and Kyla Zhao. So pretty cool lineup there. And then for July, I will be putting up a voting poll tonight. We are going to be reading something that aligns with the Diverse Baseline Reading Challenge. So that is a reading challenge that goes all year long, and it celebrates and highlights BIPOC authors. And then August book, I'm trying to give all of it. I'm like, this is a lot, but people have been begging for me to give like an extended view so they can prepare. So we even have our August book picked out right now, and that is Nowhere Like Home by Sarah Shepard. I don't have any dates picked out for that yet, but I just know that's our August book, and we are collabing with another book club, which is called We Book and We Brunch, based out of Tucson. We collab with them every August, and we go for either something set in Arizona or something desert themed. And that book has Tucson references. So super cool. And then
I have to say, not to interrupt you, Hannah, but I met Sarah when we were on the panel that you put together at the Tucson Festival of Books. And of course, I knew her work. I had not read her new book yet and did not have a chance to finish it before the panel. I just finished it and have been meaning to send her a note because I was like, what? I think she has like the most surprises at the end of a book that I have encountered recently. I was so impressed. I am definitely going to log in for both of those because A, I love Stephen Rowley. He's hilarious. He's so fun. That's going to be great. And B, like, I'm going to be typing questions for Sarah. Like, how did you think of that? Like, what would, I mean,
both her and I recently, when I had gotten to attend her launch party for that book, she had like her in conversation partner was Carolyn Kepnes, who wrote the You series. Yeah. And I was like, how are you two both like so normal and sane? Like you just are so chill and so friendly, but your books are terrifying. And like, where does your brain come up with this shit? Like it's absolutely bonkers in the best way. But like you meet them and you're like, oh, they're not even like eclectic, like they're super normal. And I'm just like, this is very odd, but very cool. All right. And then we hinted at it later or earlier. Wow, what are words? So Sarah does have a playlist of kind of, you explain your playlist and I'll link it afterwards.
So like many writers, I listen to music when I'm writing. I often listen to the same song over and over and over again, obsessively. And so especially when I was writing the Dante scenes, You Got the Silver was a song I've listened to at least 1,000 times. I also just knew the world of the bands that were popular starting in the late 60s and early 70s have a certain feel, a certain sound. And so I would often listen to work by them as I was writing to put me in the mood, to think about what the band was listening to, what would have been playing, you know, in their limo when they're driving to a show. And so it was either songs that I was literally listening to when I was writing or songs that I put together to evoke the mood of the book. I can honestly say the other thing I listened to, which I did not put on the playlist because it would have completely broken the mood, but is Lana Del Rey. I'm just obsessed with her. And she's so cinematic. And I think there's so much texture to her music. And so I really wanted my book to also be very sensual, to have the details of the desert and of these just beautiful homes and hotels and restaurants that Mari is going to. And so I listen to a lot of Lana when I want to get in that kind of mood.
Very cool. I'll link it down below in the video description here. So when you're watching the replay, it will already be there. But right now, as of this exact moment, all of the links to follow Sarah and buy her book are down below. So please go follow her on all the platforms. Please buy her book or request it from your local library. That is also very helpful. And when you're done, review it, because that is very important. Even if it's just like a 1 or 2 sentence review, that is extremely helpful. And that is always a wonderful thing you can do to support authors. All right, that is all of the housekeeping. I am definitely going to have to come up with some sort of like reunion tour. I've been thinking about this because I'm like, as much fun as I'm having hosting every new author each month, we also have been around since 2018. I've just evolved this book club a lot since then. And I'm like, I think maybe I'll have to do some sort of like writer's room-ish live stream type thing where like I have a couple of you on at a time. So this isn't, my point is this isn't a goodbye. That's just a goodbye for now. You're not rid of me yet.
Good. Well, also, as I mentioned to Hannah when we were first logging on, I just moved into my new location. I feel like it looks like I'm in like a secret bunker somewhere or something. I haven't had a chance to hang art yet. I did put a copy of my book nearby, so you know I have like, I'm not just alone in an empty padded room. So by the next time I see you, I'll have a little bit more vibe going on. So I'll look forward to showing that off as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. It is always so lovely to hang out with you. I am endlessly inspired by you. Your life is incredibly fascinating, but you approach it all with just like such compassion and heart, and you're just such a kind and thoughtful person. So I always appreciate our conversations, whether they're virtual with an audience or just the two of us. But I'm just very thankful that you've stepped into my life this year.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, it takes one to know one. So I was just going to appreciate you for just all that you do for writers and the book world and community, especially during kind of a weird fractured time. It's just really nice to know there are safe places we can go and celebrate books and thoughts and being real and honest and kind. And so I'm so grateful to know you. And I'll be logging on for some of these upcoming book clubs because they sound great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone watching us in the future. We appreciate you too.
Okay. Bye, Hannah. Take care.